Hello there. First and foremost, I want to thank you for ordering this jewelry box class. I really appreciate it. Should be a really fun project. The first thing I'm going to do is break down my lumber. I'm going to bring you in here and kind of show you my design idea so far. Right now, you know exactly what this thing's going to look like. I still am going to be figuring some stuff out as I go. That's kind of usually how I build a project. I'll get my rough ideas on paper and then I'll start working it out as I go. And then at the end, I'll have a nice set of polished plans that other people can work directly from. So I'm going to build the case of it out of this quarter sawn white oak. We're going to do a river top and build a nice little frame that holds the whole entire jewelry box up and kind of gives it a nice little look. Hopefully that's the case. So we're gonna bring in here, I'll show you what I'm thinking a little bit, and then we're gonna dimension this lumber. I'm gonna first thin this down to 1/2 inch on the planer, this quarter sawn white oak, and I also need to do a little planing on this walnut for the river top because it's still pretty rough. And then we're going to start cutting our pieces out. So come on over here. So here's the original idea. I was going to do a lot more dovetails than what I ultimately decided on. I just thought it was going to be too much. You know, dovetails are really cool and showing off joinery is really cool, but sometimes I think it can end up being a little tacky. So I decided to do mitered tops. I still might end up mitering this lower drawer yet. I don't know yet at this point, but right now I think I'm going to potentially dovetail that. At first I was going to do dovetails all over the place. And one of the reasons I wanted to do dovetails, especially on these two middle drawers, was because I wanted to have the tails or the pins extend proud, and those would actually be the handles that you would grab to open up. And I had to have the direction, you know, typically on a drawer, your tailboards are the ones that are on the sides. Like on this drawer here, the tailboards will be on the sides so that the front and the back stay locked into place. But for this one, it looks a little off, but actually you do need those tailboards at the front because the stress point is going to would have been where these pins are, because you're opening and closing, and that's where the pressure, the compression and tension, the back and forth movement would be on those. So that's where it needed to be oriented. And I thought maybe just these being this orientation, the bottom drawer case being that orientation, and when you pull out the drawer, they're a different orientation. It was just too much, too confusing. And I thought it probably would take away from the river top, and you just don't want to go overboard. I really like that idea. I want to build drawers with the tails being the handles at some point, or the pins. I like incorporating joinery into my actual function. I did that on a couple other projects. But for this one, we're just going to probably do miters on those, and I'll add some nice pulls, and it'll look a little more classy. So let's jump in, start dimensioning this wood. Now this whole project got initiated by Rockler. They asked me to make a jewelry box or some sort of keepsake box so I can build a river top for it to show off their new to them MAS or mass or moss epoxy that they're carrying. So that's why I'm doing the river top on it. I probably wouldn't have done a river top if this was a project I would have come up with on my own to do without them coming to me for this project. So you don't have to do a river top by all means. Obviously the top's one of the easier things to change on this. You can make it out of a solid piece of walnut, out of the quarter sawn oak, or whatever. So if you're not a big fan of the river tops, by all means make it out of whatever. Now here for the legs that I'm milling up, these are actually blanks for turning. They're walnut, so they're super figured. Not stuff that's nice and dimensioned. You can see as they've dried, they're twisted all to hell. So what I'm doing is finding the edge on these pieces that touches at 2 points. So the belly is towards the fence so that it doesn't rock. It's actually touching on 2 points. That way I can get a flat edge, since these blanks are short enough. And I'm going to cut these to about 1.5 inches, and then later, or 1.25 inches, and then later on I'll finish cutting them, because they're that crazy figured wood. A lot of times if it's really figured, once you mill it, it'll move some more. So I'm milling it a little bit thick still, and then I'll come back after a couple days. If it's twisted or moved anymore, I'll mill it back down to my final dimensions, which are for the frame going to be 1 inch for the uprights, and then a little bit wider for the 2 bottom feet. It's probably just best to use a thicker piece of regular old walnut for that, so you don't have to mess around with that step that I just did there. You can just straight off a board cut it and not worry about all the crazy twists and everything. But that's what I was doing there. Now, since I want my grain to be oriented from one side across the front and to the other side, I'm taking my nice piece of quarter sawn wood and I'm picking out the nicest section of it, and which happened to be in the middle of this board, and I'm cutting that out, and that's going to be my main show pieces there. So that's why instead of starting from one end and working, I kind of picked out the most beautiful section here in the middle. And if you want the grain to continue on the front all the way down to the middle or the bottom drawer, then you're going to need a wide enough board, obviously, to accomplish that. And then I'm going to joint one edge with my number 5 or my number 6 hand plane, get it square and get it nice and straight so that I can run that along my table saw and cut out my pieces to width. Now, if you have a joiner, obviously you can do that, but a hand plane works. Or if your board just comes from the hardwood dealer or wherever you get it, it should be pretty straight. And you know what's really funny is that you'll be surprised at how accurate your eye actually is. When you're joining an edge for squareness or planing something to be flat, your eye is actually really, really good. I could tell on that board, that little narrow 1/2 inch board there, that I wasn't quite square and had to keep going until I got it where I thought it was dead square, and sure enough, it was pretty much dead on. So for me, my planer, I don't have a really nice fancy planer, just that regular DeWalt one. So usually it requires some touch up with the hand plane to, for one, get rid of those snipe marks at the end and just clean it up. You can also use a regular orbital sander if you want, but I tend to like using a hand plane. So I used my miter saw to get it to rough length, but to get that nice perfect square edge, I'm going to use my crosscut sled, which I actually just got from Rockler and really nice. It comes with a drop table instead of just letting that board hang out into space like that, but I never installed it yet. But anyway, a crosscut sled is going to be a lot more accurate than a miter saw in my case, and so that's why I get it close with that miter saw, because having that, since I was cutting out that board in the middle of the board, it's kind of big and cumbersome to use on the table saw. But once I got my middle piece out, then it makes sense to use this crosscut sled here. And here I'm cutting off the far edge. Now it's important to remember which edges are touching, which are going to be your continuous grain, and you don't want to kind of cut off the excess at that joint between the front and the side, because then your grain wouldn't be very nice and continuous. So make sure you keep track and cut off the far edge that's supposed to be waste, if that makes sense. Now here I'm adding tape and lettering and numbering all my pieces so that when I rip them, I'll be able to orient all this grain a lot easier rather than fumbling everything around. All right, so I have my board laid out, and what I'm doing is I want to keep track, since we're going to be book matching and keeping these all in sequence. So on my piece of board, how I want it cut out, I have A1, A1, A2, A2. Then over here, my first swinging drawer is B. So the B ones at the corners, these two faces will be visible. I want that to be matched sequentially, book matched. Then this piece that's getting cut off the bottom, I can either use it for that drawer, which I probably should, or cut a new one for it. And then I want to keep these matching too, so I'm going to cut out my scrap in the middle rather than at the end. Same here, since I want this all matching along this way, this is where the scrap will be. And then on the bottom here, this D drawer, the scrap will actually be at the edge, and that's why these won't match up. That's probably why I'm either going to use this piece for the swinging drawers, or I can still use it for that bottom. But because I want this to all be book matched on the front, I'm going to remove these pieces on the sides. So that's how we have it laid out, and then I went ahead and put the tape and numbered them before I ripped them. That way I can keep everything together a lot better. So it really doesn't matter what the drawer side pieces are made of. You could use that bottom piece, the leftovers for the bottom piece, or you could use those pieces on the swinging drawers. It really doesn't matter that much. For the swinging drawers, that inside side piece and the back piece, you might want to try to use wood from the same board so that the color is the same, but that doesn't have to be the continuous grain, so don't worry too much about that. You'll be able to get those pieces from your scrap wood and your other boards later. The nice thing about this design is that the bottom drawer and the middle drawers and the top section are all going to be the same width, so you don't really have to worry about changing your table saw fence once you get that set. Alright, so we'll take these four because they all are the same cut. Now again, it's important to remember which side is your waste side here, so keep track of that and make sure you only cut off the waste side if you want to make sure your grain is nice and continuous. So once I figure out that distance, then I can use the stop block on my crosscut sled and cut the other three pieces. Try that. Give her a cut, test it. Bottom one, we need to take 1/2 inch off each side. Okay, now the center one needs to be 7 5/8 in from each side because we're removing the middle. I'm going to do, come in 7 5/8. Now the reason we're removing that middle section is that is where our central divider will be. And we want to remove that from the middle so that the grain is continuous again. All right, so I have that's going to be my top. These will be my swinging doors, drawers, and this will be the bottom drawer. So I still need the sides for the bottom drawer. Then I need backs and bottoms, bottom and back for this, and then a back and bottom for the top compartment. So I'm going to, with my scrap from earlier, I'm going to make the bottom, or the back for this. The back for this will be integrated with the back of the whole cabinet, and then I need to make backs and sides. I should be able to get all that out of these two pieces of scrap, and then I'll probably have to grab this other piece of white oak here to make the bottoms for everything. You don't have to use white oak for the bottoms. You can use whatever material you want, and even for that bottom drawer side, you could also dress it up and maybe use curly maple or something like that, but I just stuck with white oak just to keep everything kind of consistent. Sometimes you can really make things look tacky if you get too carried away with too many different woods. So I just went with white oak since I already had it, and even though a lot of it's hidden and it's kind of a shame to waste it, it still looks really, really nice. So. Anytime you're cross-cutting like this and you have that extra long piece hanging out, a piece that's longer than the piece that you're cutting, hanging out in the space, it's a good idea to actually put that drop wing in there. Or if you have a regular cross-cut sled, you don't have to worry about that. But I was a little lazy there, but put that wing on there if you have it. So now here again, I'm ripping to rough, or I'm cross-cutting to rough width on the chop saw, the miter saw, and then now I'm using the cross-cut sled to get those nice square cuts. Then I'll usually give the edges a couple passes with the hand plane to remove any burn marks or any saw marks that were left by that circular blade on the table saw. That's why mats are nice. All right, everyone, that's about it for dimensioning this wood and getting all your stock pretty much prepped for the next stage. We'll see you on the next video. Thanks a bunch.